In this video, we are going to continue learning about if-else statements and continue on with what we learnt in our previous video. Now, if you do forget what if-else statements are all about, it's basically allowing users to make decisions. Okay, and depending on what decision they make, our code can go in multiple different paths. So in today's video, what we're going to be doing is we're going to pretend that we work for a theme park and we're in charge of a particular ride. The rule is to get on this ride, you need to be at least 120 centimeters tall and you need to be 8 years or older. If you meet that criteria, then you're allowed to go on the ride. But if you don't meet either of those criteria, then you are not allowed to go on the ride. So as you can see there, our code's got two pathways it can take. It can either allow a kid to go on the ride, or it can deny someone from getting onto the ride. Okay, so that's what we're going to be creating today. The first thing we need to do in our app is we need to set those boundaries or the parameters of the height and the age. Okay, so I'm going to make two new variables here. Okay, first one's going to be called height limit, and I'm going to set that equal to 120. So that's 120 centimeters. Then I'm going to type in as my next variable on the next line age limit, and I'm going to set that equal to 8. So that was 8 years old. Okay, the reason we put these into variables is that we might want to change these numbers further down the track. So instead of rewriting all of our code just to cater for that change, all we need to do now is just change these numbers. Okay, and it won't affect the rest of our code. The other thing that I want to show you here, when we wrote this variable, we've got two words. We've got the word height and we've got the word limit. Now variables can't have spaces in them like that. So what we do is we join the two words together and just put a capital here where you would usually have a space. Okay, we did the same with age limit. Usually there'd be a space there, but because we can't have spaces in the name of our variables, we just put a capital there instead. Alright, so we've set our two boundaries, or our two parameters that we need to work within. Okay, the next thing we're going to do is we're going to ask the user to enter in their height and their age. Okay, so first thing I'm going to do is a couple of input statements. So we'll input, we'll do the height first. So enter your height in centimeters. We'll close off the quotation marks and brackets. And on the next line, we will enter your age in years, colon, space, quotation marks and brackets to finish off. Okay, so we're asking the user two questions. The next thing we need to do is we need to store these answers inside some more variables. We should be getting used to doing this by now. So the first one here, we're looking for the user's height. So let's come up with a variable name that's meaningful. I'm going to use the word height. So back at the start of that line, I'll write height equals. Okay, and whatever the user types in for their height will be stored inside of that variable height. On the next line, we're talking about age, so let's come up with the variable name age and set that equal to whatever the user types in as their age. The other thing you should be starting to get familiar with now is putting the word int in front of input and opening up a bracket, going to the end of the line and closing a bracket. And we'll do that again for the next line down on the age there. We'll just put an int before input, open a bracket, and then at the end of the line, close a bracket. Now if you still don't know what int means, it stands for integer. And what it's doing, when the user enters their height in, usually the computer would think it's a string of characters. Okay, that could be letters or numbers, and it won't be able to do a calculation on that string. So what we're going to do is we're going to convert that string of characters into integers. And that's going to allow us to do a mathematical equation on the next few lines. Okay, so that's the reason we converted it from a string to an integer. So as I just said, we are going to do some calculations now to see if these kids are actually allowed onto the ride. So the criteria, as I said at the start of the video, was that they must meet the height limit of 120 centimeters and must meet the age limit. They must be older than 8 years of age. So there's two things that we need to take into account here. So let's start with an if statement. We're going to write if the height is greater than or equal to the height limit and the age is greater than or equal to the age limit. Then we put a colon at the end. And before I go any further, I'll just explain that to you and what we're doing. So if the height that the user types in, we're getting that from this line here, if their height is greater than, that's the greater than symbol, or if it's equal to the height limit. So the height limit's 120, that's up here. So if the height that the user types in is greater than or equal to 120, and their age, so the age comes from here where they enter their age in. So if the age that the user types in is greater than or equal to the age limit. So here's our age limit up here, which is 8. Okay, so if we meet both of these criteria, then what are we going to do? So we go to the next line. Remember to press enter, and you should see your mouse cursor indent. And that just tells us that we're only going to run this code if they meet this criteria. Okay, and all we're going to do is we're going to print a message. So we'll just type in print, open up some brackets and quotation marks, and say you may go on this ride. That's it. But now we've got to cater for the fact if the user doesn't meet these criteria. So if they're shorter than 120 centimeters or they're less than 8 years old, then what are we going to do? Okay, so we go down to the next line of our code and write else. Basically saying, what else do we do then if they don't meet the criteria? So we put the word else and put a colon at the end there, just after else. Don't forget that colon, it's really important. Now when you press enter, you'll see your mouse cursor is indented again. And that means we're just running this code if the user doesn't meet those first criteria that we talked about. Okay, so we're just going to print a message that says, you cannot go on this ride. Full stop, close the quotation marks and the bracket. And that's it. That's our next if-else statement done. So let's save it and we'll run it and test it. Okay, so we'll save this one as, what are we up to, number 9. I'll just call it if-else statement 2. Alright, let's run it and we'll have a crack at it. Okay, so let's enter our height. We'll make ourselves taller than 120, so let's say 140. And our age can be 12 years old. When we press enter, it says, you may go on this ride. So that's working. Let's stop it. We'll run it again. We need to test all the options to make sure our code's working properly. So if we enter our height as, say, 100 centimeters, so we're shorter than what we need to be. Okay, and we'll enter our age as, say, 5 years old. Okay, so we are too young here. It tells us you cannot go on this ride. Alright, that's looking good. Now there's one other thing that we want to try out here. What if we are actually taller than the height limit, but we are younger than the age limit? Okay, let's see what happens. So it says enter your height in centimeters. Let's make ourselves taller, so 150. But our age, we're going to make it younger. So we'll make it 6 years of age. Okay, the rules are we shouldn't be allowed on the ride. So let's see what happens. It says you cannot go on the ride. So that's good, our code's working. And the reason that it worked then was this word here, and. Okay, the only way we're allowed to go on the ride is if we meet the height limit and we meet the age limit. Okay, there's no one or the other. We have to meet both of those criteria. If we changed a bit of our code though, so if we change this word and to or, that means we only need to meet one criteria now. So if we meet the height limit, but we're too young, that won't matter. Okay, it's just one or the other. As long as we meet one of these criteria, we'll be allowed on the ride. So let's save it and test that. Okay, so if I enter my height as 150 again, so I'm definitely meeting the height limit, but I'm too young, so I'm 6 years old. We should still be allowed to go on this ride because we're tall enough. There we go, so it says you may go on this ride. Alright, so they're two key words that you should really get to know, the and the or. Okay, you'll use them time and time again in your coding as well. But apart from that, hopefully you've got a bit of an understanding now of how if-else statements work. As I said, it's your choose your own adventure path. So if we meet the criteria, then we print that line of code. If we don't, then we just ignore that line. We skip straight past it, and we go down here and print this one instead. Okay. If we do meet the criteria, we print that line, but we completely forget about this one. Okay. So with a bit of practice, you'll start to really understand how if-else statements work, and you will find that you'll be using them quite a bit in your coding. That's all I'm going to talk about in this video. In our next video, we're going to look at even more complex if-else statements.